The arrival of the Harrington estate stood like a fortress on the edge of the city, where the lake shimmered with silver light and the gardens stretched endlessly as if trying to remind the world of the family's wealth. To anyone on the outside, it was paradise, a home of marble halls, crystal chandeliers, and walls that had seen generations of power and privilege. But behind those walls lived a little girl who had never known what it meant to run through those gardens, who had never taken a single step without wheels beneath her. Clara Harrington, the billionaire's daughter, had been confined to her chair since a terrible accident 3 years earlier. She was bright, imaginative, and gentle. But each day her world grew smaller as her father's fear and her nurse's cautious routines kept her away from anything that might hurt her fragile body. Her father, Richard Harrington, was a man who had built empires on risk, but when it came to his daughter, fear ruled every decision. He had hired the best doctors, paid for the finest equipment, and surrounded Clara with staff, but none of it had brought her closer to walking again. If anything, the luxury only deepened her isolation. Richard told himself it was protection. But in truth, it was his guilt. He had been driving the car on the day of the accident. The memory of his daughter's cries haunted him every night, and though no one dared to say it aloud, the weight of his shame hung heavy in every corner of the mansion. When Maya Williams first walked into that world, she did not belong. Everyone knew it the moment she stepped through the front door. The staff, who had polished their accents to sound more refined, the butlers who carried silver trays with practiced silence, the nurses who had served wealthy families their entire careers. Maya carried none of their airs. She wore a plain uniform, her skin dark against the white marble walls, and her eyes carried both the tiredness of struggle and the quiet fire of determination. She was a black woman from a working-class neighborhood, the daughter of a seamstress, who had spent her life patching clothes for other people's children. Life had taught Maya to stand straight even when others tried to bend her. She had studied hard, worked nights to put herself through school, and built a reputation as a pediatric physical therapist who cared more about her patients than about appearances. Yet, in the Harrington estate, she was not introduced as a therapist. She was called a maid, a helper. Someone brought in to keep Clara company while the real professionals handled her care. The moment Richard Harrington's eyes met hers, there was a flicker of something unspoken, doubt, suspicion, perhaps even disdain. To him, she looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong house, someone who could not possibly understand the fragile glass world he had built around his daughter. The staff picked up on it instantly. Whispers followed her in the hallways. Glances lingered longer than politeness required. She did not belong, and they wanted her to know it. Clara, however, was different. The little girl with wide eyes and curls that caught the light like spun gold was lonely enough to see past the surface. The first day Maya wheeled her into the sunroom, Clara tilted her head and asked, "Do you know any stories?" Maya smiled, surprised by the question. Instead of reciting a fairy tale, she told Clara about her own childhood, about how she and her brother would turn their tiny living room rug into an ocean, and the couch into a boat they had to leap onto without falling in. Clara giggled at the thought of such games, her world of tutors and cautious nurses never having allowed such silliness. For the first time in a long time, the little girl's laughter filled the house, and it echoed through the marble halls like something alive and new. But laughter was not what Richard Harrington noticed when he entered the room. What he saw was Clara leaning forward in her chair, trying to stretch her toes the way Maya had gently encouraged her to do. His face darkened, fear rising instantly in his chest. "What are you doing with her?" His voice cut across the room, sharp enough to silence Clara's laughter. Maya stood slowly, her hands steady even as the weight of his gaze pressed against her. "I'm helping her move, Mr. Harrington. Just a little exercise, nothing dangerous." Richard's jaw tightened. "I don't need you experimenting on my daughter. She has trained specialists for that." Maya's reply came softer than his. Anger, but firmer than his authority. "With respect, sir, I am a specialist, and I don't experiment. I help children believe they can do more than the world has told them they can." The air in the room seemed to freeze. The staff who had followed Richard and shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke to him that way. But Clara, small and quiet in her chair, whispered, "Daddy, I like her. She makes me feel like I can try." Richard's eyes flickered to his daughter. Then back to Maya, suspicion still clouding his features. He did not argue further in that moment, but his silence was as heavy as a dismissal. That night, when the house was quiet and the lake wind pressed against the windows, Maya sat in her small staff room with her mother's words echoing in her memory. "Stand tall, even when they try to cut you down." She had faced worse than glares and whispers. She had faced a world that had told her, from childhood, that she would never rise above where she was born. And yet, here she was, standing in a mansion among people who doubted her. She wasn't there for them. She was there for Clara. The days that followed were battles fought in silence. Each morning, Maya arrived in Clara's room with a smile, gently stretching the girl's legs, encouraging her to try movements so small they seemed invisible to others. But to Clara, each twitch of a toe was a victory. Each attempt to straighten her knee was a spark of hope. And hope, Maya knew, was stronger than medicine. It was the belief that tomorrow could be different, and for a child who had been told she would never walk again, that belief was everything. The other staff resented it. Denise, the private nurse, lingered at the door during sessions, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed. More than once, Maya caught her whispering to others, planting seeds of doubt. "She doesn't belong here. Mr. Harrington will see it soon enough. People like her don't last long in houses like this." The words stung, but Maya refused to give them power. She had walked into prejudice before, and she had learned the only way to silence it was through proof. The turning point came on a gray afternoon when the sky threatened rain. Clara had been unusually quiet that day, staring out the window as if the weight of her chair pressed heavier than usual. "Do you ever think I'll walk again?" she asked suddenly, her voice so small it nearly broke Maya's heart. Maya knelt beside her, looking into her eyes. "I don't just think it, Clara. I believe it, and you will if you believe too." The girl hesitated, then whispered, "I want to try, right now." It was a risk. Richard would have forbidden it if he were there. But Maya saw the spark in Clara's eyes, and she could not extinguish it. She helped her place her bare feet flat against the polished wood floor, supporting her gently under the arms. "Just think about moving your toe," she said softly. "Not your whole leg, just the toe." Clara squeezed her eyes shut, her face tense with effort. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, her big toe twitched. Clara gasped, her eyes flying open. "Did you see that?" "I moved it." Maya's smile was wide and warm. "Yes, you did. And tomorrow you'll do it again." It was at that exact moment that Richard entered. He had come to call Clara to dinner, but instead he froze in the doorway, watching his daughter beam with pride. "Daddy, look!" she cried, wiggling her toe again. His breath caught in his throat. For years he had seen nothing but stillness, and now, before his eyes, was movement, hope, and yet, instead of joy, shame surged within him. He remembered his anger, his accusations, his suspicion toward the woman who had made this possible. The weight of it pressed so heavily that he turned and left without a word, his footsteps echoing up the marble staircase. That night Richard could not sleep. Clara's words replayed in his mind. "Mia told me I could do anything if I believed in myself." For the first time in years, his daughter had spoken with hope. And for the first time in years, he felt the sting of realizing that his fear, not her body, had been the greatest prison she lived in. At midnight, he found himself outside the small staff room door. He hesitated only a moment before knocking. When Maya opened it, her eyes wary, he spoke quietly, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "I was wrong." The words hung between them, heavy but real, breaking the silence. The night air was still, the kind of heavy quiet that made every sound carry further through the vast hallways of the Harrington estate. When Maya opened the door to her small staff room, she stood in the dim light with her arms folded, her expression caught between surprise and caution. She had not expected to see Richard Harrington standing there, stripped of his usual grandeur, without the commanding posture he wore like armor in the daytime. His voice was softer than she had ever heard it, almost hesitant. "I was wrong," he said, the words unfamiliar in his mouth. He cleared his throat, struggling with pride and regret. "I let fear talk. I let prejudice talk. And I let it convince me that you came here for something other than what you said." Maya's first instinct was not to accept his words, not to rush into forgiving. The sting of his earlier accusations still burned deep, his voice echoing in her memory, calling her an intruder, calling her dirty, accusing her of being sent to harm the child she had come to help. She could still feel the weight of his fist clutching the collar of her blouse, the venom in his tone. Those wounds did not heal in a single apology. Yet she also remembered Clara's proud little smile when her toe moved, the girl's voice trembling with joy as she announced that she could believe in herself again. For Clara, Maya knew she could not simply walk away. So she held his gaze with steady eyes, her voice calm but firm. "You don't owe me an apology, Mr. Harrington. You owe your daughter a chance. And I will keep giving her one, whether you stand in the way or not." Richard nodded once, his jaw tightening, but he did not argue. "Clara needs you," he admitted, the words tasting bitter yet honest. "And I need to face the fact that I cannot protect her the way I thought I could. I want you to stay, not as staff. As her therapist, as someone I can trust with her care." His voice cracked on the word trust, as if even speaking it felt like breaking through stone walls he had built around himself. "And about your mother," he continued, lowering his eyes for the first time. "I'll cover her treatments, her medications, whatever she needs. It's the least I can do if you'll stay for Clara." The room seemed to shrink around Maya as he spoke, the memories of his harsh words still weighing heavy. Trust did not grow from an offer of money. But she also thought of her mother back home, coughing through sleepless nights, praying she could keep working just a little longer at the sewing machine to pay for her medicine. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again, her decision already clear. "I'll stay," she said finally, her voice steady, "but not for you, for her." The following morning brought with it a strange shift in the atmosphere of the estate. The same staff who had mocked Maya in whispers now moved with stiff politeness, as if aware that something had changed overnight. Richard Harrington, usually silent at breakfast, broke his own routine by instructing Denise, the nurse, to step back from certain duties. "Maya will take over Clara's morning routine," he said flatly, his tone leaving no room for protest. Denise's lips tightened into a thin line, but she bowed her head and muttered, "Yes, sir." The change was not small. It was a declaration that Maya, the woman most of them had dismissed as unworthy, now had the authority to guide Clara's care. The resentment in the air was palpable, but Maya ignored it. The only thing that mattered was the little girl smiling at her across the table, whispering, "I knew you'd come back." When Maya wheeled Clara into the sunroom that morning, the lake shimmered outside the wide windows, and for the first time, Clara seemed eager to begin. "Maya, look," she said proudly, wiggling her toe again. "It's still moving." Maya knelt beside her, smiling with quiet pride. "That's what I like to see," she said. "And today we're going to build on that." She guided Clara through stretches, encouraging her with playful stories of her own childhood games, turning each exercise into something fun rather than clinical. Clara laughed so hard she nearly tipped from her chair when Maya described pretending. Her living room rug was a river filled with crocodiles, and the couch cushions were rocks to jump onto for safety. Richard appeared at the doorway midway through, his suit jacket immaculate, but his eyes ringed with shadows as though sleep had eluded him. He did not speak, simply watched. Maya refused to acknowledge his presence, keeping her focus on Clara, counting softly as the girl tried to straighten her legs more than she had the day before. When Clara pushed herself against Maya's hands, her knees trembling with effort, she looked toward her father. "Daddy, look!" she cried. Richard's eyes softened, a flicker of pride warming his otherwise guarded expression. "That's good, Clara," he said cautiously, his voice carrying both hope and fear. After the session, Maya wheeled Clara into the dining room where the long mahogany table gleamed under the morning light. The staff set the table with precision. silverware aligned as if measured. But beneath the polished surface lingered disdain. One of the younger maids leaned toward another and whispered, just loud enough for Maya to hear, "Guess some people really can talk their way back in." A chuckle followed. Maya felt her jaw tighten, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence could be stronger than anger. Clara, however, slipped her small hand beneath the table and held Maya's. "Don't listen to them," she whispered. "They don't know you." Richard's gaze swept the room then, his eyes narrowing as he caught the exchange. "If anyone here has a problem with Miss Williams," he said in a voice that cut sharper than any knife, "they can hand in their notice today." The silence that followed was thick, the weight of his authority pressing down until the maids lowered their eyes. For the first time since she had stepped into the house, Maya felt that Richard was not just tolerating her. He was standing behind her. Later that afternoon, as Clara napped, Richard summoned Maya to the library. The rich scent of leather-bound books and polished wood filled the air, mingling with the faint crackle of fire in the hearth. He stood by the tall windows, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. "I meant what I said last night," he began. "Send me the information for your mother's doctors. I'll take care of the bills. It's not charity," he added quickly when he saw the hesitation on her face. "It's recognition. Clara's progress belongs to you as much as it does to her. And if helping your mother keeps you here, then I'll do it without question." Maya studied him, her arms folded across her chest. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. "You don't owe me anything. You don't even like me." Richard exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging as though under a burden he could no longer hide. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But I owe my daughter the best chance she can get, and if that means trusting you, then so be it." His words were not tender, not the apology she might have expected, but they carried a raw honesty that was harder to dismiss. That evening, Maya took Clara out into the garden, the crisp air carrying the scent of autumn roses. Clara watched a squirrel dart across the grass and whispered, "Maya, do you think I'll ever walk here? Like, all the way to the roses?" Maya crouched beside her chair, her eyes meeting the girl's. "Yes," she said firmly. "And when you do, we'll plant a rose bush together. Bright red, just for you." Clara's eyes lit with wonder. From the terrace above, Maya caught the shadow of Denise, arms crossed, watching with narrowed eyes. The battle was far from over, Maya knew, but Clara's trust was worth every fight to come that night. Maya sat by her small window overlooking the moonlit lake, her heart heavy yet hopeful. For the first time since entering this mansion, she felt the faint hum of possibility that perhaps this house, with all its prejudice and shadows, could be the place where a little girl found her strength again, the test of Fire the Harrington. Estate woke the next morning beneath a pale sun that filtered through the mist clinging to the lake. Inside, the household buzzed with its usual rhythm, clinking silver, echoing footsteps, murmured orders passed from one servant to another. Yet beneath the surface, a subtle tension lingered, like a storm waiting behind closed clouds. Everyone in the house knew something had shifted. The maid they had whispered about, the woman they had dismissed as temporary, was still there. More than that, she was no longer just tolerated. She was being defended by Richard Harrington himself. In a house where wealth and bloodlines ruled. Like gods, Maya's presence was an open defiance of old prejudices, and not everyone was willing to accept it. Maya felt the tension in every corridor she walked. But she carried herself with quiet dignity, her head high and her focus fixed on the only thing that mattered, Clara, that morning. She entered the sunroom to find the little girl already waiting. Her hair a tousled halo around her face, her hands resting eagerly on the armrests of her chair. "Maya," Clara whispered, her eyes shining. "I dreamed again. I dreamed I was running through the garden, past the roses, past the fountain, and Daddy couldn't catch me." She giggled at her own vision, then grew serious. "Do you think dreams mean anything?" Maya crouched beside her, adjusting the straps on her chair. "Dreams," she said softly, "are the seeds of the life we want. If you believe in them, if you water them with courage, they can grow into something real." Clara's face lit up, and for a moment, The heavy air of the house seemed to lift. The exercises that morning were more ambitious. Maya introduced a balance bar, a simple wooden frame padded for safety, where Clara could grip and attempt to straighten her legs. "We'll take it one step at a time," Maya said, her voice calm. Clara's hands trembled as she gripped the bar, her body straining against years of stillness, but Maya's steady encouragement pushed her further than before. By the time the session ended, Clara had managed to hold herself upright for nearly 30 seconds. Her face glowed with pride, and she whispered breathlessly, "I didn't think I could do it, but you made me believe." It was then that Richard entered. He had been observing quietly from the doorway, his usual businesslike composure cracking just enough to reveal astonishment. For a man used to commanding numbers on a stock exchange, to watch his daughter balance on her own two legs was something greater than profit, greater than empire. His throat tightened, though his voice remained steady. "That's impressive," he said. Clara beamed at him. "Daddy, Maya says if I keep practicing I can walk again." Richard's eyes flickered to Maya, a silent question trembling in their depths. Not just can she, but dare I believe it? Maya held his gaze and answered without words, her calm certainty more powerful than any statistic. The day's victory did not go unnoticed. By the time Clara was wheeled into the dining room for lunch, the whispers had already spread among the staff. Some spoke with reluctant admiration, others with growing resentment. Denise, who had once ruled Clara's care with cautious authority, watched from across the room, her arms folded and her eyes sharp. "It's dangerous," she murmured to another maid just loud enough to be heard, "pushing her like that. One slip, one fall, and she'd be worse off than before." The words floated in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. Maya said nothing, but Richard's gaze hardened. He set down his silverware with a deliberate clink, the sound echoing against the polished table. "If anyone in this house undermines Miss Williams again, they will not remain under this roof," he said flatly. The room fell silent. The message was clear, but silence does not erase malice. That afternoon, as Maya prepared Clara's tray, she noticed the eggs left uncovered, a thin layer of dust settling on top. Her stomach tightened. It was a small act, but deliberate. A quiet attempt to discredit her, to make it appear she was careless. Maya remade the tray without a word, but the incident burned in her mind. Someone was trying to push her out, and they didn't care if Clara suffered in the process. Later, in the garden, Ellen, the older maid who had watched Maya with a more measured eye, approached while pruning the roses. "They won't stop, you know," she said quietly, her hands never pausing their work. "Some of them don't like change, and you are change." Maya sighed, her eyes on Clara, who was laughing at a squirrel chasing its tail near the fountain. "I didn't come here for them," she said. "I came here for her." Ellen nodded once. "Then hold on to that, because it's going to get harder before it gets easier." Her words proved true sooner than Maya expected. On Friday afternoon, Maya entered the sunroom to find Clara's wheelchair empty. Panic jolted through her chest. She searched the hallways until she spotted Denise at the back door, speaking with a delivery man. "Where is Clara?" Maya demanded. Denise didn't look up. "In the garden." She wanted fresh air. Maya rushed outside and found Clara struggling across the uneven stone path with a walker, her knees shaking violently, her small face pale with effort. She was only a breath away from falling when Maya darted forward, catching her just in time. "Clara!" she cried, her voice trembling. "You could have hurt yourself." Tears welled in the girl's eyes. "I wanted to surprise you," she whispered. Richard arrived moments later, his expression hardening as he took in the scene. "What happened?" His voice was sharp, directed not at Clara but at Maya. Maya explained quickly, her tone steady though her heart pounded. "She was outside alone. She nearly fell. I stopped her." His gaze shifted to Denise, who suddenly found the roses fascinating. "We'll talk later," he said coldly, his voice laced with restrained fury. That night, Richard appeared at Maya's door again. His face was drawn, but his words were firm. "Denise will be taking a leave of absence," he said without preamble. Maya blinked in surprise. "You're letting her go because of me?" He shook his head. I'm letting her go because my daughter's safety comes first, and because I trust you. The words struck her deeply, not because they erased the hostility of the house, but because they revealed something she had not expected, a man who was willing to put his child's progress above his pride, above his prejudices. For the first time, Maya allowed herself to believe that perhaps this battle could be won. The following morning, the estate felt different. Without Denise's shadow, Clara seemed freer, lighter, as if the absence of doubt had opened space for her hope to grow. That afternoon, in the crisp autumn air, Maya guided her along the garden path, each step steadier than the last. Richard watched from the terrace, his hands resting on the railing, his heart caught between fear and awe. "She's getting stronger," he murmured when he joined Maya later. Maya nodded, because she believes she can. That belief is worth more than any therapy. Richard studied her then, his voice quiet. "And I believe you're the reason." "She has it." Maya turned her gaze back to Clara, unwilling to let the moment soften her guard. She knew this battle was not over. Prejudice still lurked in the corners of the house. Resentment still whispered in the hallways. And beyond the gates of the estate, the world was not ready to accept a black maid turned savior in the life of a billionaire's daughter. But as she watched Clara's trembling legs take another step, as she heard the laughter of a child who had begun to hope again, Maya knew this was a fight worth every scar, because sometimes the most dangerous battles are not fought on battlefields, but in the silent war against doubt, fear, and prejudice. And in that war, Maya was determined to stand unbroken. The gala of shadows the days after Denise's dismissal felt lighter in the Harrington estate, though the air still held whispers that clung like cobwebs in the corners. Clara's progress was undeniable now. Each morning, with Maya's steady guidance, she grew stronger, her fragile muscles awakening as if they had only been waiting for someone to tell them they still mattered. The balance bar no longer terrified her. She approached it with determination, her small hands gripping tightly, her legs trembling with the effort of bearing her own weight. Maya's voice always followed like a compass, calm, encouraging, steady. Step by step, you are stronger than you think. And each day, Clara proved it true. Richard Harrington, once a man who dismissed hope as dangerous fantasy, had begun to linger in the doorways more often. He no longer interrupted with doubts or warnings. Instead, he watched in silence, his eyes softened by something he had nearly forgotten how to feel: belief. In the evenings, when Clara slept, he would sometimes summon Maya to his library. Their conversations were awkward at first, his words clipped by pride, hers guarded by memory of his cruelty. But slowly, in those quiet hours surrounded by leather-bound books and the scent of firewood, he began to share fragments of himself. He confessed that he had been afraid of hope, that losing Clara's ability to walk had broken something in him, something he had buried under anger and suspicion. Maya listened, her responses measured, her trust still hesitant. Forgiveness, she knew, was not a gift given cheaply. But each time she saw Clara's joy, she knew the cracks forming in Richard's armor were not weakness. They were the first signs of a man remembering how to be a father. It was in this fragile period of renewal that an invitation arrived. Delivered in an embossed envelope with a golden seal, it announced a charity gala hosted by the Crawfords, one of Richard's oldest business partners. Richard read it aloud at breakfast, his voice neutral, but Maya saw the flicker in his eyes. When Clara's face lit up, "A gala?" she whispered, her voice full of wonder. She had never been to one. Her life had been confined to this estate and to the occasional medical appointment. The thought of sparkling lights, music, and crowds of people thrilled her. "Daddy, can I go?" she asked eagerly. Richard hesitated. The gala would be full of society's sharpest eyes, its cruelest whispers. He had shielded Clara from the outside world precisely to avoid those looks, those judgments. But then he looked at her, at the way her eyes shimmered with longing, and he knew he could not keep her hidden forever. "Yes," he said finally. "You'll go, and Maya will go with us." The announcement rippled through the household like a stone in water. Some of the staff whispered openly now, their words edged with venom. "Taking her to a gala? Bold choice," one muttered. "Not just the child, the maid too?" Their laughter echoed behind closed doors, but Maya ignored it. She knew what they did not. Clara's dignity mattered more than their opinions. The night of the gala arrived with the first frost of winter glittering on the lawns. The Harrington car pulled up to the Grand Hotel ballroom, its chandeliers blazing like captured stars. Clara wore a pale lavender dress that shimmered as she moved, her hair neatly braided with a ribbon. Maya, dressed in a simple but elegant black gown Richard had arranged for her, walked beside the chair, her hand steady on the handle. Richard, tall and commanding in his navy suit, completed the picture. Yet the moment they entered, Maya felt the shift. Eyes turned, voices lowered. Guests whispered behind crystal glasses. The sight of a billionaire's daughter in a wheelchair was enough to stir curiosity, but the presence of a black woman at her side sparked something sharper. The Crawfords greeted them with polished smiles. Evelyn Crawford's pearls gleamed in the chandelier light, but her eyes flicked over Maya with cool dismissal. "I see you've brought your assistant," she said lightly. Richard's voice cut like a blade. "She's not my assistant. She is the reason Clara is walking again." Evelyn's smile froze, but she said nothing more. Clara, oblivious to the undercurrent, giggled and asked if she could taste the chocolate fountain she saw across the room. Maya bent to whisper, "After you show me your best stretches at the table." The girl nodded eagerly. The evening unfolded like a performance, each guest playing their role, the men with their firm handshakes and practiced boasts, the women with their brittle laughter and sharp glances. Clara endured the small talk with quiet dignity, answering politely when spoken to. But then came the moment that broke through the veneer. As dessert was served, Evelyn leaned toward Clara with a sympathetic smile. "Do you go to a special school, dear?" Clara hesitated, glancing at Maya. "I study at home," she said softly. Before Maya could add anything, Spencer Crawford, Evelyn's teenage son, snorted. "Yeah, because you can't walk." The air at the table froze. Richard's jaw clenched, but before he could speak, Maya leaned forward, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Clara can do more than you think, Spencer. She's stronger than most people in this room." Spencer smirked. "My dad says people like her should just accept it and not make things harder for everyone." Clara's cheeks burned with shame. But before tears could fall, Maya's voice rose again, steady and clear. "People like Clara," she said, her gaze sweeping the table, "are the reason the rest of us learn what real strength looks like." The silence that followed was heavy. Evelyn cleared her throat, forcing a smile. "Well, children can be blunt," she murmured. But Clara, her face flushed with both embarrassment and determination, spoke up. "Maya believes in me. I can walk. If I keep trying." "Yesterday I stood for 20 seconds on my own." Richard's expression softened with pride. "She's telling the truth," he said firmly. "Clara is stronger every day." The conversation faltered after that, but the damage and the revelation lingered. Later in the evening, Clara insisted on trying something bold. With Maya's hand steadying her, she stood beside her walker in the middle of the ballroom floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she balanced, her legs trembling, her face alight with joy. "Look, Daddy," she called. "I'm standing." Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then genuine. For a moment, the whispers were drowned out by the sight of a little girl, refusing to be defined by her chair, but envy is never far from admiration. As the night wound down, a waiter carrying a tray stumbled near their table. A glass of red wine tipped, splashing across Maya's gown. Gasps rose again, but this time the whispers returned sharper, crueler. "Accidents happen," Evelyn said, with a thin smile, though her eyes betrayed satisfaction. Maya dabbed at the stain, her face calm, her dignity intact. Clara reached for her hand under the table, whispering fiercely, "Don't let them win." When Richard returned from speaking with a donor and saw the stain, his eyes darkened. Without a word, he removed his jacket and draped it over Maya's shoulders. "We're leaving," he said firmly. In the car, silence filled the space until Richard spoke. "You didn't deserve that." Maya's voice was soft but steady. "I've been through worse." Richard's reply was sharp. "That doesn't make it acceptable." Back at the estate, as Maya helped Clara change into her night clothes, the little girl whispered sleepily, "I think tonight was still good. I gotta see the lights, and you were there." Maya smoothed her hair, her heart tightening. "That's all that matters," she said. But as she walked back to her room, she knew the gala had been more than a social test. It had been a battlefield. And though she had left with her dignity intact, she could feel the war sharpening around her. The whispers were no longer confined to the staff. Now society itself had begun to take notice. The sun had dipped low against the glass towers of the city, painting the skyline in strokes of amber and violet. Inside the grand hotel ballroom, the air was thick with whispers and tension. The night that had begun as an evening of laughter, music, and casual cruelty had now transformed into a stage of reckoning, and everyone present could feel it in the pit of their stomachs. The billionaire Jonathan Langston sat at the head of the long banquet table, his once proud shoulders rigid, his hands clenched so tightly the veins showed. But it wasn't his wealth or his power holding the room hostage anymore. It was the presence of the woman he had once dismissed, the woman he had underestimated, and the woman who now stood tall before the glittering crowd, her voice commanding respect with every word. Maya Williams was no longer the servant they thought they knew. She was the storm they had never seen coming. As she spoke, every word carried the weight of truth sharpened by years of silence. The guests, once eager to sneer, now found themselves shifting uncomfortably, their forks abandoned, their glasses untouched. Some avoided her gaze, others leaned in, compelled by the force of her story. Maya was not shouting, yet her calm tones sliced sharper than any scream could have. She told them how dignity had been denied to her, how she had been treated like a shadow in rooms where she carried trays for people who never bothered to learn her name. She reminded them that true power did not sit in expensive suits or bank accounts, but in character, in the way one chose to treat another human being when the world wasn't watching. Each word was a mirror held up to Jonathan's face, reflecting not the man he thought he was, but the man he had allowed himself to become. Jonathan tried to interrupt, his voice straining to regain the authority he once wielded so easily, but his attempts only revealed his desperation. "Enough," he muttered, though his tone carried no force. The murmurs around the table grew louder, not in agreement with him, but in recognition of the shifting tide. For years, Jonathan had controlled these rooms with his wealth, but tonight, wealth had no currency. Tonight, conscience was the only language that mattered, and Maya spoke it fluently. She stood not as a victim begging for pity, but as a victor reclaiming her truth. Her presence was undeniable, her courage unshakable. For the first time in decades, Jonathan Langston was not the most powerful person in the room. Maya stepped closer, the soft rustle of her dress echoing in the silence. She did not look at Jonathan as one would look at an enemy. Instead, she regarded him with a steady calm, as though she were seeing not the giant he had been, but the hollow man he had become. "Do you know why you fear me now?" she asked, her voice quiet yet filling every corner of the hall. "It is not because I am stronger, richer, or louder. It is because you know that truth does not need wealth to be heard. You spent years believing your money was your shield. But tonight, money cannot save you. Tonight, only honesty can." The room held its breath. Some of the guests, who once laughed at Maya, now found tears stinging their eyes. Ashamed of their own silence in the face of injustice, Jonathan felt a heaviness settle on his chest, a suffocating realization that he had built his empire on foundations weaker than glass. For the first time in his life, he saw how fragile power was when it was not paired with integrity. The walls of arrogance he had built around himself were crumbling under the weight of Maya's words, and though pride urged him to fight back, a deeper part of him, the part he had silenced long ago, knew that resistance was futile. The truth had come, and there was no stopping it. He lowered his gaze, unable to meet the eyes of the woman who had once carried his discarded dishes, who now carried the strength of an entire room in her voice. His silence was not surrender, but it was the closest thing to it that a man like him had ever known. The ballroom erupted. Not in applause, but in something far more profound, a stillness that acknowledged change. Maya did not bow, did not thank them for listening. She did not need to. She had claimed her space with dignity, and that was enough. As she turned to leave, a wave of respect followed her, unspoken but palpable. Guests who once ignored her now rose instinctively to their feet, not because they were told to, but because they knew they were witnessing something far greater than a confrontation between a billionaire and a waitress. They were witnessing the triumph of truth over pride, of dignity over arrogance. Jonathan remained seated, his empire of control shattered, his hands trembling in the candlelight. And in that moment he understood. Maya Williams had given him something no fortune could buy, a reckoning he could never escape. The night after the confrontation spread across every major news outlet, the city seemed to hold its breath. For the billionaire, Richard Cole, silence had always been a weapon. He used it in boardrooms, in political donations, in carefully calculated statements. But this time, silence became his curse. Every time he turned on the television, there was Mariah's face, the waitress who had spoken one sentence that tore through his arrogance like glass under pressure. Clips of her poised reply played on endless loops, dissected by talk show hosts, bloggers, and analysts. "Power is not money," she had said, her voice trembling yet unbroken. "Power is the respect you give even when you think no one is watching." What Richard did not expect was the weight those words carried. Outside the glittering dining hall, in neighborhoods he never drove through, in schools where children sat on broken desks, in offices where workers whispered about being unseen, her words became a rallying cry. For the first time in years, he was no longer the man shaping the narrative. The narrative had swallowed him, and it belonged to Mariah. His advisors begged him to release a statement, to spin the story, to buy silence. But no amount of PR could undo the rawness of that moment, the billionaire yelling, and the young black waitress answering with dignity that pierced deeper than wealth. Meanwhile, Mariah's life shifted in ways she could never have imagined. The restaurant owner, shaken by the fallout, called her into his office the next day with trembling hands. Instead of reprimand, he offered her his deepest apology and a raise he admitted he should have given long ago. Yet Mariah, looking him in the eye, declined. "I don't want more money for silence," she said gently. "I want fairness for everyone who works here." And with those words, she unknowingly started something larger than herself. Her co-workers, who had watched her humiliation in silence that night, now stood taller, emboldened by her courage. Some confessed they had been too afraid to speak. Others admitted they thought justice was impossible. But now they saw that truth spoken even once could shake the walls of power. Across town, Richard sat in his penthouse, staring at the skyline. For the first time in years, the glitter of the city lights did not comfort him. He had built towers, crushed competitors, and filled his accounts with billions. Yet here he was, a man exposed by a waitress in front of strangers. But beneath his bitterness, a strange unease grew. He remembered his mother, a maid who once ironed clothes for wealthy families while whispering lessons about respect. He had buried those memories beneath luxury, yet Mariah's words unearthed them like buried fire. He wondered if the empire he built was nothing more than a monument to forgetting who he was. The story refused to die. Universities invited Mariah to speak about dignity and courage. Community groups held up her photograph on posters that read, "Respect is power." Even journalists who had never cared about waitresses now filled their columns with her words. And yet Mariah never sought the spotlight. She still walked to work, still helped her younger brother with homework, still held her mother's fragile hand at night. What changed was not her life, but her vision of it. She now knew her voice carried weight, even when others tried to dismiss it. Richard finally broke his silence weeks later. Instead of a press conference, he appeared unannounced at the same restaurant. Cameras followed him, but the city doubted. Was this a performance? Another game of power? But when he entered, he did not order champagne or summon attention. He walked to the table where Mariah was serving and stood quietly, like a man stripped of armor. His voice, for once, carried no arrogance. "I was wrong," he said simply, loud enough for those nearby to hear. I thought money excused disrespect, but you reminded me that it never does. The room froze. Guests who once feared him now leaned closer, waiting for Mariah's reply. She looked at him, her eyes steady, her hands calm. Respect cannot be bought, she answered, but it can be given freely. The question is, will you give it when no one is watching? Her words echoed once more, not as defiance, but as truth. And this time, Richard did not argue. He lowered his head, the weight of decades pressing down, and for the first time in his life, he looked small. The city would remember that moment too, not because a billionaire apologized, but because a waitress stood her ground and taught him what no fortune ever could. The story ended not with vengeance, but with a truth that belonged to everyone who had ever been overlooked. Dignity is power, and those who hold it can never be silenced.